Hi, and welcome you at the third session at Security World. Today, almost in the cloud, and Yidia Schwartz shows you everything how to build a resilience, a journey of crafting and validating our disaster recovery plan. And Yidia is certified AWS solution architect, leading the company's infrastructure domain, designing and implementing complex architectures, bringing observatory and performance on the top level. He has 12 years of experience, various software development as from the team lead to the tech lead. And now Yidia shows you how to build a resilience. Be aware and hopes everything will be good, and go Yidia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Hello everyone, as he just presented me, my name is Yedidia Schwartz, and I'm here to talk with you today about the journey of crafting and validating our disaster recovery plan at a startup with millions of end users. Okay, and from my experience, actually, the fact that you joined to this specific session today may save your company or your individual projects tons of money, okay, if you will take some of the insights from the case study that I'm about to share with you today. But before we start, I have a question. I want you to take a look on these DAICs, and maybe you can think if you recognize one of them, bad things happen on these DAICs. So what happens, these are the outage DAICs of US East 1 AWS region from the past 3 years. And once in a while, a critical service is down, okay? And then many depending services goes down with it. So let me tell you something. You actually have the power to design your architecture to be resilient and not being one of these unavailable services that goes down when everyone goes down, okay? This is the definition of resiliency in AWS docs. This is the ability for a system to recover from a failure induced by load attacks and failures. So one of the best indications of having a resilient architecture is the fact that you have a bombastic DRP, a disaster recovery plan. A few words about myself before we dive in. Today I'm working as a backend tech lead in a small, fast-growing gaming startup in Israel. But until 3 months ago, I worked at OwnID. And the case study today is from that company. At OwnID, I was the software architect and the DevOps lead. I led the infrastructure domain. I designed, implemented new features, and dealt with observability, performance, production health. As it is a small startup, it was kind of a one-man show because we were a really small team. It was a lot of fun. Before OwnID, I was a tech lead at WalkMe. It's a bit bigger startup. And before to that, I was a commander in the IDF Army Intelligence. Lately, I was chosen like 3 months ago to join to the AWS Community Builder Program, a really interesting program with a lot of opportunities. I recommend you to read about it. And I'm also a certified AWS Solution Architect. I'm holding a BA and Master Philosophy degrees. And I'm a married and father of 2. So after you got to know me a bit, what should you expect from this session today? So I will open with a short introduction of few common concepts and terms that you should be familiar with so we can discuss about DRPs. Most of this session will be around a real case study of a DRP architecture, which I designed, implemented, and validated. We will touch many aspects, starting from the high-level architecture and diving into low-level things like GitHub Actions and if infrastructure as code, tunings I had to do, data replication challenges, and some critical decisions during the process. At the end, I will summarize the main takeaways. So to give you the context of the technical aspect of the session and why we need a DRP, I want to cover shortly the product and where it meets the customers. So with OwnID, they provide a seamless web-based authentication solution that eliminates password using FIDO2 and WebAuthn API, some pretty new technologies, also known as passkeys. it's a small startup, less than 10 developers, and among the customers, you can find big enterprise. Millions of end users needs OwnID product to work in order to authenticate to the website. So it can't afford any downtime, because then it costs a lot of money to the customers. The case study I'm about to present was performed actually without knowing about the following 7 steps. But once I completed the disaster recovery plan, to design it and to write it, I noticed that it can be formalized into a method that can help others. So and then I split it into 7 steps, and now we will go step by step. The first step is the BIA, Business Impact Analysis and Risk Assessments. You need to understand, before you are diving into any technical part, you need to think about the business, if you even need a DRP. Because you need to understand what is a DR. First, you have the disaster. In our case, we ask to deal with the production region outage. Okay, that's the specific disaster that we dealt with in our disaster, but there are many other possible disasters. And the suggested recovery is a multi-region architecture. Every disaster should be handled differently. A recovery process that will help you with your production region outage, the same recovery won't help you if someone stole your AWS account. Okay, it's a totally different disaster. You need a different recovery. So before you start, you must ask yourself, what is the disaster you are willing to deal with, and what is your suggested recovery? In our case, the disaster is a region outage, and the suggested recovery is a multi-regional architecture. Step 2, you need to analyze the DRP ROI, return of investment. You can spend your whole year building a DRP, and you cannot do it at all. It's your choice. You need to choose. Before starting to design a DR, you must define what is the availability level that is required from your system during a disaster. Not every component in your organization has the same SLA, so before diving into the technical part, remember to have a well-defined product availability requirements. The business guys, product, and DevOps, they all need to sit together and discuss. If the cloud cost and the developer working hours that are required to develop and maintain the solution worth it, then you should go for it. Now we know the business needs. Step 3 is to translate all the business needs into technical implementation terms. The challenge is actually to translate all these requirements to a practical DRP architecture. Exactly for this, there are some basic terms that everyone who designs a DRP must know. First, we have the RPO and RTO. RPO is recovery point objective, and RTO is recovery time objective. The RPO refers to how back will you take me in time once the system is live again. How much data I may lose. For example, if I lost my access to a database, when I will have the new database ready from my backup, if the backup was taken 1 hour ago, I have a chance to lose 1 hour of data. In that case, the RPO is 1 hour. And the RTO refers to how long until the system is active again. It refers to the future. Lower RPO and RTO values reduce downtime and data loss, but come at a higher cost and operational complexity. Okay? There is an inverse relationship between cost and RTO and RPO. The more money you invest, the lower RTO and RPO will be, and vice versa. If we focus for a second on our case at OwnID, our required RPO is 10 seconds. We are storing customers' configuration in the data. For example, the widget color, that the widget should appear in the customer's website, the OTP configuration, if we should send it by email or SMS. We have few configurations per customers. It's a multi-tenant system, okay? So for each customer, we store everything in all the configurations on the same database. And we also it's important to mention that end users' data, like the customers of our customers, we are not storing any data of the end users. The authentication data is not stored on our side, okay? So we don't have real-time data, so we are okay with taking the risk of losing 10 seconds. That's why we decided about our RPO. And regarding the RTO, our customers are expecting the product to be 3 nines available, okay? It means that we have very few minutes of allowed downtime during a month, okay? So once a disaster happens, we need to be live again in not more than 20 minutes. I want to give you the idea of how we came up with the 20 minutes. This was the thinking flow, okay? First, as I said, our customers are expecting our product to be 3 nines available. It means that we have around 44 minutes of allowed downtime per month. We assume that we may have 2 production incidents per month, which gives us around 20 minutes per incident. So it's not a golden rule, okay, but it's one way to decide about the RTO. And you can have many other processes of thinking of how to come up with that number, but it's important to have the number, okay? So now that we have our RTO and RPO, let's go to the next decision we need to take before the implementation. The first choice you should make is between active-active and active-passive architectures. In active-active, you have 2 environments, the operational and the DR environment. They are running in parallel all the time. They are providing RTO and RPO values that are close to 0. Theoretically, it can be even 0. Active-active is the most expensive architecture you can choose. It's actually may double your cloud cost. Netflix, for example, they are using active-active-active architecture. They have 3 production environments running in parallel. And if you're a small startup, so your system will survive a disaster amazingly, but not sure that your bank account will survive it. So most of the startup and companies don't fund themselves in this architecture. We have active-passive, where the DR quality is downgraded in terms of RTO and RPO, but things are getting more realistic, okay? Active-passive is a very flexible approach. The more cost you save, the more required actions you will need to perform to bring your DR environment to be fully operational when you need it. This affects directly your RTO and RPO. The first approach in active-passive is backup and restore. This is the minimal DRP you may have. You just need to back up your data once every few minutes, hours, or days you need to choose, and without any extra preparation in the infrastructure level, okay? If you have a disaster, you will have to start building your environment from scratch using your data backup. In our case at OwnID, it may take like 2 days to create a running environment from scratch. 2 days, as the RTO are way too much for our requirement, which is 10 minutes, 20 minutes. So this approach is not relevant for us. Pilot Light and Warm Standby are the interesting strategies. The main difference between the strategies is the time it takes you to bring the disaster recovery environment to be ready for receiving requests. In both strategies, a functional stack is deployed, but with a reduced capacity for cost saving. In Warm Standby, the DR environment is ready to handle requests without any extra manual actions, and in Pilot Light, you need to take few manual steps to make the environment to be fully ready to handle production workloads. In our case at OwnID, the solution we chose is very close to Warm Standby, but since we have a few manual steps for the environment to be fully available, it's not a pure Warm Standby, so I would tag our solution as a Pilot Light, really close to Warm Standby, but not there yet. The sweet spot we found between Pilot Light and Warm Standby was an output of our RTO and RPO. I just asked myself, does this set of manual actions will take me more than 20 minutes? The RTO is the 20 minutes limits that I have. Since the answer was no, I decided that it's okay to go with the Pilot Light approach. So that's all about DRP architecture strategies. That was the thinking process and how we chose the architecture. So just before diving into the implementation, we have step 4, filter out background noise. When you start to dive into the implementation, first, I decided to filter out many components from the DRP. We had many services and cloud components that we don't need to be part of the DRP. I mean, if you have 100 microservices, you need to think if all of them needs to be fully available during the disaster. You need to translate the ROI, the business decisions into technical decisions. If a nice to have feature, like for example, a BI screen that we have to show statistics about the end users, I'm okay if it won't be available during a disaster, so I left it out of scope. You just need to make sure that your end users, your customers, will have a nice message that tells them currently there's an issue with this feature, it will be available later. But you need to have in mind to keep your business going on with the core features. And you should not spend your time on nice to have features. So now let's dive into step 5, which is the implementation. As a start, I would like to dive into our architecture in high level. I simplified it a little bit in order to focus on the important components, and I left some components out of scope just for this session. The examples I'm about to present are mostly from AWS, but there are equivalent services that exist on any other cloud vendor. Okay, so we have an end user, and that end user performs requests from the browser to the relevant record on Route 53. This is AWS DNS service. The DNS record references to AWS CDN, CloudFront. Just as a reminder, the CDN content delivery network, this is a geographically distributed network of proxy servers. The goal is to provide high availability and performance by distributing the services to be located near the end users. That's why we are using it. The CDN references as its origin to S3 buckets. This is AWS storage service in order to serve static files, for example, JavaScript, translations, etc. The CDN references also API gateway and load balancers for dynamic server requests. And we have Kubernetes cluster behind the API gateway, also known as EKS on AWS. And the Kubernetes is communicating with Postgres database, Redis, and Secrets Manager AWS service. We have also the IAM, Identity and Access Management, is also a part of the picture. That's the Users and Permissions Management AWS service. That service interacts with all the mentioned components. And to build the disaster recovery plan as a start, I split these services into 2 groups, okay? The first group is for global services. When you create a global service, you don't need to mention the region, okay? They are distributed on every region out of the box, and the cloud provider orchestrates it for you. You don't need to choose the region when you create it. The second group is for the regional services. These are region-dependent services. Most of the services on every cloud vendor are regional and not global, okay? The instance of the service you create exists only in the region that you choose once you create it. So in the DRP we are building, these are going to be the more challenging parts, as you probably can understand, because they are region-specific. If you lose the region, then all the services goes to be unavailable with it. So the step 1, I decided to deal with the data, the stateful parts of the system. And the data domain, most of the time, are the most complex parts to handle during a disaster. Our app has 4 data services: Postgres database, Redis, Secrets Manager, and S3 buckets, okay? So first, let's talk about the RDS, the Postgres database. This is the source of truth of our customer configurations. So to promise the backup of the data on another region when needed, we configure the read replica on the disaster recovery region. The read replica is updated asynchronously after each write to the primary replica. The read replica lag may be from few milliseconds to few seconds, so it fixes our RPO requirement of 10 seconds. Like we can afford ourselves max 10 seconds of losing data, and according to AWS docs, you won't have a lag of more than 10 seconds, so that's why this solution is good for us. In case that the main region is unavailable, we promote the read replica to be the primary replica, and actually it's becoming the main database. Starting from that moment, the read replica, which is now the primary replica, becomes writable, and the previous primary replica is out of the picture. And of course, this is only the database that you see on the right, but later on, you will see how I'm going to build in the disaster recovery region the whole environment around this database. But for now, we are focusing only on the database. The secrets manager, we have for it even a similar approach. You can just create a secrets replication on another region. It's a super simple process in AWS. And as I said, we use S3 buckets to store static content such as web apps, code, and translation. So we decided that for each bucket, we will have the same equivalent bucket in the disaster recovery region. As part of the CD process, when we upload the content to the primary bucket, when we deploy new version, we deploy also to the disaster recovery bucket in the second region. We could use something that AWS calls CRR, cross-region replication, but since the data is not frequently changed, but only on deployments, we didn't want to create an overhead and to make it complicated. So we prefer to keep it simple by performing the backup manually from the CD process. That's an example to show you another approach that you don't need to always use the cross-region replication of the cloud provider. You can also download, upload the files twice and control the process from your side. That's also an accepted approach, okay? Regarding Redis, the data we store on Redis can be split into two main types. First, we have the end user sessions. This is the data that holds the current login flow status. Like an end user that's performing a login or registration using our product on a customer's website. It's like a session of around less than 1 minute, a short-term object that stays. It can tell you on which step the user is during the process. It's the details about the flow context and more, if he clicked on the button, if he's waiting for an email to approve. That's one type of data that we store on Redis. And we also store on Redis customer configuration cache for each customer's application. We store a long live record. Okay, it says a long TTL. For example, it stores for every customer's application the site domain, OTP code length configuration, few labels, translations, and more. So we decided that there's no need to back up the data or create a replication in another region for Redis. To simplify the DRP, we are okay with losing Redis data on a disaster. Let me take you back to the ROI concept, returning of investment, what I mentioned before. We have the end user sessions. They are very temporary, the sessions. So we are okay with losing a few of them, because once the region is down, we already lost the end user that tried to log in. He won't wait for 20 minutes until we will be live again on the disaster recovery region. We lost that end user, so there's no point to recover his data of that specific session, okay? That's from the side of the end user sessions that were stored on Redis. And we also stored customers configuration, as I said, but we have them on Postgres database and then can be loaded as a fallback from Postgres database, which is replicated to the disaster recovery region, it takes like 1 second, and we can warm up Redis with all the configurations, okay? So that was an example of not storing a data components, not backup. Like, we are okay with losing it, and it's fine. Don't just look on every data component of your system and go and create a backup and replications and everything. We decided not to backup Redis. So we are done with the data components. Now, I want to go back to the global services thing that I mentioned at the beginning. And specifically, I want to talk about the resiliency, okay? The services that I talked at the start are Route 53, the AWS DNS service, IAM, the permissions and users management service, and CloudFront CDN. You would probably expect from me, when building the DR architecture, not to duplicate the global services, but reuse them in both environments, on the main environment, on the main region, and on the DR environment. And once a disaster happens, I will just switch the origin of the CDN to reference the disaster recovery region. From global services, as they are global, you could say that you expect them to stay available when the region is not available. So to understand why this architecture may be a huge risk to your system, we need to be familiar with the way that cloud providers manage their services availability. We have AWS, Azure, GCP, and all the familiar cloud providers. They rely on the concept of control plane and data plane when managing their services. Global services have a dependency on these two components as well. Control plane is responsible for admin API actions, such as creating or removing a server, creating S3 buckets, change the description of a queue, etc. Data plane is responsible for simple common actions. For example, reading from EBS volume, reading data from an S3 bucket, a DNS record that answers a query, this kind of regular actions. Data plane actions are less complicated and are much highly available than control plane actions. Moreover, data plane actions are relying on distributed components. In AWS, for example, inside of every region, there are services that performs their data plane actions inside of the region. Control plane, on the other hand, is relying on a specific region, okay? Every service, such as CDN and Route 53, they relies on the control plane that exists on a specific region. Every service has its control plane in a specific region, okay? It's documented in the cloud provider documentations that you can find. For example, CloudFront CDN control plane is located specifically in US East 1, for example. So if that region is down, US East 1 is down, although CloudFront CDN is declared as a global service, it won't be able to perform control plane actions, since the control plane is in a region who is unavailable at the moment. So switching the origin between the regions, as I showed you in the last diagram, is an action that relies on the control plane. Okay, so once my main region will be down, in our case, it can be really US East 1, I will try to switch the origin to the DR region to perform the disaster recovery plan, but the action will fail. My CDN will be stuck. Keep referencing to an unavailable region, and there's nothing you will be able to do about this downtime. Like, the environment will be stuck on an unavailable region. This is why you should avoid from control plane actions on your global components during your recovery process, okay? So additional CloudFront distribution, pre-configured to the disaster recovery region. This is the solution to be on the safe side. Provisioning the resource before the disaster, this is the right choice. Prevent dependencies on the control plane actions, okay? The same approach we also took with IAM for configuring users, roles, and permissions in advance. We did everything before. Route 53 is configured with a health check and a DNS failover. This is our only consistent components, the DNS. which is shared between the environments. On a disaster, it will automatically switch the traffic between the CloudFront distributions. And this is an action that relies on a data plane actions. So the only extra action which is required to complete the DRP is actually to promote the database read replica to be writable, as I described before, and after all, to increase the resources. So the new environment will be able to handle the production load, okay? So we have the architecture ready. Now, after you have the architecture, it's hands-on time. I want to share with you some of the techniques we use while implementing this architecture, few highlights, and how we actually had to think about the DR in so many aspects during the way, okay? We are managing the infrastructure using Terraform. So the disaster recovery environment needs to be created using Terraform too. So to do so, I split our Terraform resources into 3 types that help me think about the DR, okay? First, we have identical components that needs to be duplicated in the DR environment exactly as they are. For example, the Kubernetes cluster, API gateway, S3 buckets, okay? The second type is components that need to be created with different configurations, such as the database and the secrets. The database needs to be created again in a read replica mode, okay? And the last type, this is components that are reused in both environments that don't need to be created at all for the DR environments. For example, the DNS records. Since we really don't have time to dive into details of what I did, I'm going to cover only the database module. So the challenge was to run the same module for a regular environment that should have a standalone regular database, and for the DR environment that needs to hold a replication of an existing database from another region. So you can see that I use the flag is DR environment. So for a regular environment, the standalone database is created, and for the DR environment, a replication of the provided database ARN, the identifier of the original database, the replication is created. And another important point, also while your system is under a disaster is happening, and you finish to perform the disaster recovery plan, you may still want to keep deploying code to fix bugs and to keep the business ongoing, okay? That's why as part of the disaster recovery plan, you need also to have in mind the software lifecycle, including CI/CD. So this is our CI/CD platform. We're using GitHub Actions. I had to make sure that both environments are deployed on a regular basis in parallel jobs, and that there is no region coupling during the process. You can see a different containers registry URL configured for each environment on every region, and the jobs don't depend on each other. It's very important. So if one fails, the second one won't stop and roll back, okay? They can run independently. All these examples and more, they are available in the GitHub repository that I will share with you at the end, so you can dive into them later on your free time. So we finished to cover all the services and the implementation, and we have our architecture ready. Now, step 6, you need to make sure you have everything well documented in an execution plan document. Personally, I wrote it during the first test execution. I actually performed an action, and then I documented it right away, how much time it took, issues I might have with it, and how to solve them, as documented as you can write it, as all the details, okay? And the last step, and one of the most challenging steps, is actually the maintenance. How can you make sure the DRP will still work in a year from now? Just imagine what may happen to the disaster recovery environment after 6 months with no traffic, because you didn't have any disaster. You were lucky and you didn't have any disaster for 6 months. No one can promise you that the infrastructure is maintained or that the code was successfully deployed all this time. When there's no traffic, there are no issues. So it's super difficult to tell when something breaks in a zombie environment. So in order to prevent from such case, what we did is to set up an API testing tool that runs synthetic tests in front of the disaster recovery environment 3 times per day. We created a DNS record that will allow us to access the environment, and in order to be able to perform write operations to the database, we also created another database in the DR environment, a writable instance, besides the read replica of the database from the main region, just for testing purposes. Okay, we are painting the testing request using a header. So the code knows to direct the testing request to the testing database. Okay, all the environment is monitored by our testing tool, observability tool. In our case, it's Datadog. And in case that something breaks, we immediately get an alert. So the tests are maintained and always simulates real traffic. So that's how we can promise that our disaster recovery environment will work in the money time. Okay. So the disaster we are preparing to deal with is a full region outage, but sometimes only small parts of the cloud provider services, small parts of the region may have issues. And it's not sure that you're going to need to perform the full DRP at all, okay? Small disasters may happen, a single availability zones can have electricity issues, data replication may stop, and so on. So if you prepare your system to be resilient for these edge cases, the chance that you will have to apply the full disaster recovery plan are smaller, okay? You can use some amazing tools in case you are running your workloads on the famous cloud providers that I want to share with you. And even if you don't, you have also tools outside of the cloud providers. I want to show you first 2 examples from AWS, and then we'll move to Azure, GCP. First, we have the AWS Resilience Hub. That's a tool that scans your entire infrastructure. It can score your resilience level for each component. An output, for example, may be your database is not configured with multi-availability zone. Please fix it and come back again. We will give you a better score, okay? The second tool is fault injection simulator. That's a tool that can simulate a controlled disaster. For example, it can kill 3 out of 4 POGs of one of your most critical worker service. Such action may have a failure chain that can help you get new findings about the way your system handles the disaster. This is actually a very good implementation of chaos engineering methodology. Instead of having many assumptions, there's nothing better than testing and monitoring. On Azure, we have the Chaos Studio that was released in the past few months. It's pretty new, actually. And it provides you a nice way to have experiments on your environment and to see how resilient it is. Besides the Chaos Studio, Azure also suggests 2 more services. You have the Site Recovery, which is a native disaster recovery as a service, and Azure Backup, a service that provides a simple and secure solutions to back up your data and recover it in Azure Cloud. In Google, GCP has also a disaster recovery tool. It's called Backup NDR. That's a centralized service to manage all the aspects of the disaster recovery. GCP don't have an in-house fault injection tool in the last time I checked, but you can use many external tools. You have tons of services and open source solutions. For part of them are free for taking the chaos engineering method in your organization to the next level. I encourage you to read about them and give it a try. And this is an infinity process that should be a regular ritual in your organization if you have the capacity for it, okay? You have a steady state, then you have a hypothesis, you run the experiment, you verify the results, then you improve, and then you run the experiment again. A lot of good stuff can come out from this process. I highly recommend it. So we are close to finish. I want to summarize, to go over a few takeaways that I would like you to remember. Okay, first we have the ROI, RTO, RPO, business needs, and the strategy plan. They should be your guidelines before tackling any technical part. You need to remember that. You need to learn your infrastructure. You need to know the limitations of your cloud provider service, unless you might build a solution that won't work when you really need it. As you saw in our case with global services that are not 100% global services as you could think, yeah? So it's okay if your DRP is not perfect. Just be aware of the missing parts and what needs to be done manually. You need to create a detailed execution plan, document everything. If your manual steps are complicated, remember they will be much complicated under fire when you have a new DevOps, which is not familiar with the system, and you are not working there anymore. So in that state of mind, you need to write that document. And from now, you need to have a DRP state of mind. On every move the R&D makes, you need to think how the DRP is broken now. Like you have new service, Terraform code changes, deployment process changes, etc. Always have it in mind. You should build your system like you don't have the option to move to another region, okay? Imagine that you don't have a DRP at all. How would you design your system to be as resilient as possible and survive unavailability of partial components in your architecture? The tools I mentioned before, they are super helpful to get into the state of mind of infinity improvement of your architecture resilience. Performing the full DRP is risky, and sometimes it's very complicated. And if your system knows to deal with smaller disasters, you don't even need to go there because you don't really want to perform a DRP. A lot of stress. And a DRP that is not being tested continuously means that you don't have a DRP at all. You can test it on a duplicated test DRP environment. It's kind of a chaos engineering that simulates region outage. It can be done even on production. I heard about a company where they prefer having production issues from time to time rather than having a theoretical DRP that may not work when they really need it. That's a very inspiring approach, but I know it does not fit to every company. So you can find many references, as I mentioned, all the resources that I used to create this presentation in the DRP GitHub repository. And I would be happy to hear from you if you have any questions, suggestions, or anything else. You know how to find me. Thanks you for listening. I hope you enjoyed and learned something new.
On time. Thank you very much. Everything. No, I think that everybody will understand. And if somebody wants to have or somebody wants to ask about something, place the question here, and we are waiting for some and answering you as it will be possible. And of course, this is a great presentation. Thank you very much. So it was a pleasure to get you here.
Thank you.
And AWS is your life. It is almost see in your presentation. That's right.
I really like it.
I heard something about GCP, about Azure, but of course the AWS, as we talked before. This is your really lovely life in your IT industry then.
Yeah, but I gave a stage to GCP and Azure. I respect them.
Yeah. We should respect everyone, of course. But I'm thinking about the almost last slide around sometimes disaster happen, right? And sometimes small issues happen with some small services. Not all the cloud will disaster sometimes, but last time I heard that some of the big cloud provider delete all the data of some user, even with backup.
Yeah, it didn't happen to AWS, I know.
Okay, I don't want to say those another three letters here, but this really nice presentation, and we are waiting maybe a few seconds for for a few questions if you have anything. I do not see any. Sometimes questions are really tough to place here on the chat, but you can all the time, of course, ask Yedidia on the LinkedIn or on his private channels, right? Am I right?
Available for every question. Also in the future, a lot of time I'm getting from audience, like even 1 month after the talk, someone deals with the DRP, and then the question comes up when you get with this topic. Yeah.
All right.
A lot of information, I know.
Yeah, that was a lot of information, many slides, but the presentation was clear, and everybody should understand, I believe. And one more time, thank you very much for attending for our security ward here. I'm again say goodbye as Lucas Nowatkowski, your host today, and thank you very much, and see you for the next presentation. Bye bye.
Pleasure. Bye bye.